Good morning. This is Mary Lane Van Cleve at THA. I want to welcome you to our new Workers' Comp Proposed Rules webinar. Just a few logistics before we actually get into things. We will actually post the webinar and the recording of the webinar on the THA website. So if there are people in your facilities that weren't able to attend that would like to be able to hear that, they'll be able to do that. All of your lines are muted now, so you won't be able to talk to us. And we would like for you to type questions into the question box if you have questions, and you can type those as we go along. So as our speakers present, if you think of questions, you can go ahead and type them in. And then at the end of the webinar, we'll go to the questions, and we'll take as many of those that we have time to take, and we'll read the questions and provide the responses. As you know, the reason we are hosting this webinar is the new proposed regulations on workers' comp e-billing, and we would like to hear from you any concerns that you might have by the end of July so that we will be able to actually get those to the Department of Labor and express those on behalf of our members. We have sent the proposed regs out, but if you don't have those for some reason, you can actually reach out to us and we'll be sure that you get them. So with that, I am delighted today to introduce our speakers. I imagine many of you are very familiar with EnableComp. We've worked with EnableComp on several other things. I guess most recently was the change to the inpatient regulations, where they provided assistance to our THA work group to model some changes that would basically result in some administrative simplification and some changes to the per diems that were in there that now are in the regulations. So they've been good partners and supported our work on this topic for quite some time. So with us from EnableComp, we have David White, who is their Senior Vice President of Reimbursement, Jesse Larison, who's the Vice President of Managed Care, their Chief Technology Officer, Kevin Holvey, and their Senior Product Manager over their e-billing product, Mike Bees. Between the four of them, they've got over 50 years of total workers' compensation experience and knowledge, so we definitely have the experts in the room, and we're delighted to have them with us today to actually explain to you what's in those rules, and will be available to answer any questions that you might have on that. So again, if you've got any questions, if you'll type them in, we'll answer those, and also want to be sure that if you do have things that you're concerned about that you want to make sure that we comment on, that you get those to either me or probably most likely to Gwen, and we'll make sure that we get those to the state. So with that, I'm going to be quiet and turn this over to Jesse Larison, who'll get started on our content.
Thanks, Mary Lane. Appreciate the invite, and we're excited to be with you guys here today and with the members to talk about e-billing in Tennessee. Before I jump in, I just want to briefly share some information about our company and who we are, what we do. EnableComp is the first full-service revenue cycle company that exclusively handles work comp, and we handle work comp for 600 hospitals nationally, including nearly 100 hospitals right here in Tennessee. And it's our technology platform that really provides our clients more revenue per claim, eliminating payment delays, and reducing your overall work comp AR. So if you'd like to learn more about us, catch us after the webinar. I'll be happy to follow up with you. But with that, we'd like to jump right into the primary presentation. So one of our major focuses at EnableComp is to monitor and report on legislation and industrial changes that really have a material impact to our hospital clients. So as you can imagine, we and the rest of the work comp community across the state have been watching, Tennessee for quite some time, as changes within the work comp, industry have been significant over the past few years. And now with the state really moving toward a work comp electronic mandate for billing in 2018, there's several points to consider in order for hospitals to be efficient, compliant with the new regs, and really understand all the ins and outs with regard to electronic billing. So before we get into the guts of the proposed rules and share our principal findings and recommendations for next steps, let's talk a little bit about how we got here. So workers' comp has traditionally been the lagger of pay classes that we typically deal with. David White likes to say work comp's 8 to 10 years behind in everything that they do, and I think everyone in this room and most of us on the call would agree workers' comp is constantly behind with regard to technology and innovation. That being said, the majority of work comp billing across the country is paper-based and all the documents that are associated with that. We'll talk a little bit about the unique components of work comp and how it is a document-focused pay class as opposed to eligibility and some of the problems that brings into e-billing mandates. But if you look across the country, you can see the vast majority of states have absolutely no electronic billing mandates in place. With the proposed rule, Tennessee is scheduled to be the 4th state to require electronic billing, both mandatory for provider and payer. As of right now, New Jersey is also in the same position as Tennessee, and New Jersey has passed a mandate within their legislature, but they're still in a rulemaking form just like Tennessee is. Actually, I think Tennessee will probably pass New Jersey. I don't think that they're moving as quickly as we are now. So we've talked a little bit about the history of electronic billing, the landscape across the country where Tennessee essentially is going to be joining Minnesota, North Carolina, and Texas to require it for providers and payers. And as a result, since we're starting to see more and more states kind of push toward this, it's having a little bit of a steamrolling effect. For the longest time, there was just Texas and Minnesota. North Carolina quickly adopted it, Tennessee, New Jersey. We see voluntary adoption required in Louisiana, Illinois, Oregon, and California for both providers, but mandatory for the payer. And Georgia has regs on the books right now that are voluntary for both. I would imagine that those states would become mandatory as well at some point in the future, and we'll see more states come along. So that's a little context for where Tennessee lies within the national footprint. Why is this happening in Tennessee now? Well, in 2013, there was legislation passed that essentially required that Tennessee put forth rules and adopt rules regarding electronic submission and processing of medical bills on or after July 1st, 2014. That's a pretty open-ended mandate. You just have to do it after 2014. And here we are in 2017. We've spoken with Abby Hudgens, the chief of the Bureau of Work Comp, and she has indicated that this is where they want to take the next step. So we've got legislation already on the books that allow the Bureau of Work Comp to do this. They're moving forward with it. And I think one of the good takeaways is they have very wisely adopted most of the national standards with regard to work comp e-billing, specifically looking at the IAIBC, the International Association of Industrial Accident Boards, and adopting a Tennessee Companion Guide, which is modeled after the IAIBC Companion Guide for e-billing. So for the folks on the call that are familiar with e-billing within work comp in other states, you have facilities outside of Tennessee, this is going to be very similar to that. But let's talk a little bit about some of the requirements within the proposed rule itself. And I believe the proposed rule has been sent to all the members already, correct? Okay, good. So there are 4 basic formats that the proposed rules identify, and these are the electronic formats that providers and payers are going to have to comply with after the go-live dates are set. These are in the rule now, and we'll kind of briefly go through these basic formats. And Kevin, Mike, these are traditional formats that we see in e-billing across the country, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So obviously the first and primary is the bill, and for the hospitals on the call, this is going to be the institutional billing standard, the 837. This is essentially what contains all of the, the basic information, the relative information for the bill itself. It is effectively your electronic UB. The second bill that's identified, the second form that's identified in the form itself is the 999. That's the acknowledgement form. This file actually tells the provider, tells the payer or the clearinghouse that the file's been accepted, and it's either free from formatting errors, or if potential formatting errors have been found and the file cannot be imported by the payer, a rejection is sent to the provider via this 999. The third option, the third file format identified in the rules is the 835, and this is the electronic remittance advice. This would be similar to the EOB. Essentially, this just includes a basic explanation of the denial of the bill submission or payment information if it's adjudicated that way. And then, of course, the last format that's earmarked within the rules is the ancillary format, the 277, which is essentially a detail of the rejection or the acceptance of each bill originally submitted in the 837. Kevin, Mike, anything to share with respect to those formats?
One thing to add on 277, they're sometimes used by payers to give you updates throughout the life cycle of their review or adjudication process. So you may get multiple 277s from certain payers along the way to tell you what's going on with it. Not all payers support that, though.
Okay. Very good. David, one of the things that we've identified in the initial rule is that there are particular time frames around when these things need to be compliant,
yes, exactly.
As well as exemptions and things that may occur for both provider and payers.
Right. So the payers are first up on the requirement list. They have to be able to accept electronic medical bills by January 1 of 2018. So if you're prepared and ready to go ahead and send them, the payers must be able to accept them by that time frame. And then they would, as part of that, they're going to have to be able to transmit the acknowledgments and remittances that Jesse just went through on the previous slides. And then they'll also have to be able to support receiving the medical attachments, itemized statements, medical records. As I'm sure you're all aware, nothing gets paid in work comp without an attachment. So the payers are required to have all that in place on January 1. Now the providers, they need to implement all the providers need to implement the e-billing solution by June 1. And in which time they'll need to submit the work comp medical bills electronically, documentation, the attachments electronically as well, and then receive and process those transmittals and notifications that we just talked about in the previous slide.
Now, one of the things that they don't specifically earmark in the rule with respect to time frame is the EFT, electronic fund transfer. They do speak in the proposed rule that all payments for services are required to be paid via electronic fund transfer unless an alternate electronic method is agreed upon by the payer and provider. That's something that I want all the members to be aware of. The rule itself does specify that payment must be electronic, although we don't see a go-live time frame within the proposed rule. And I'm sure that's something that may be added later on, or if this is just an overall guideline, they don't want to kind of pigeonhole the EFT transfer to a particular time frame. I'm assuming that I know EFT brings its own set of unique challenges and solutions with regard to work comp. But as of right now, there's not a particular go-live date for that compliance requirement. It just says providers and payers must do it. With regard to who this applies to, the rule specifically does talk about some exemptions.
Yeah, payers that are relatively small, don't do a whole lot of business in the state of Tennessee. Here defined as fewer than 250 work comp bills annually will be exempt. And providers with 10 or fewer full-time employees or less than 120 work comp bills annually will be exempt from this as well. Now, there's also a provision in there that the BWC can grant a specific exemption on a case-by-case basis to either the payer or the provider if they establish that this electronic billing will result in an unreasonable financial burden to that party.
Mary Lane would be making that call, right, at the BWC?
Yeah. Yeah, there is no real definition as to what unreasonable financial burden is. It would obviously be a case-by-case review by the Bureau of Work Comp.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the exemptions and the time frames for compliance. Let's get into the details of the time frames that are associated with the actual submission itself. So the rule does specifically earmark time frames for submitting and receiving acknowledgments. The first time frame, obviously, is that after a bill is submitted properly electronically, the payer has to acknowledge receipt within 1 day. And then they have to acknowledge acceptance within 2 days. Those are two very different things, right, Mike? Mm-hmm. The second thing is that providers must not submit their duplicate bill sooner than 60 days. So you submit a bill electronically, get the receipt or the acceptance you want, right? They're asking, and they're actually dictating that the hospital do not submit a duplicate bill prior to 60 days. And that's a little outside what we at EnableComp see on a national level, correct?
Correct, Jesse. It's typically what we see in work comp is about a 45-day window, after which you can resubmit a claim.
Now, we have submitted our recommendations back to the Bureau for what we think are good changes for this proposed rule, and those are being under review, and that's something that we're going to talk about as an option for everyone on this call to be able to do later on as we provide feedback back to the state as they're forming the rules. Again, these are going to be the rules that we all have to live with in 2018 and beyond, and now we have an opportunity to communicate back to the state the things that we would like to see as a part of this rule. But because they have adopted the primary standards in the IABC companion guide, it makes it pretty palatable from top to bottom for us. The third time frame component is that payer must make their rejections for compensability within 15 business days. As most of us know, work comp is a compensability-driven benefit plan, and providers, carriers, self-insured employers make the call as to whether or not they determine that the treatment rendered is relevant to the work comp injury. If they determine it's not compensable, they have 15 days to notify the provider that electronically. And the provider must submit document requests within 7 business days. We'll talk a little bit later on about the burden of documentation within work comp. Just because we're moving to eBilling does not take that burden away. It's something that needs to be considered throughout eBilling. Providers that are not sending documentations with their original bill must send the documents that are requested by the payer within 7 days if they want to get those bills paid. And then lastly, the payers are going to have to send the EOBs or the electronic remittance advice back electronically within 5 days. So these are the time frames that have been earmarked in the proposed rules by which both payer and provider must follow. Now, there are penalties that are identified in the proposed rule specific to noncompliance. These penalties that are written here specifically address the payers, and we don't see specific penalties written out here for the providers. So it's important for us to understand that electronically submitted bills that are not paid within the 30 days or denied within 15 could be subject to a penalty to the payer between $50,000 and $5,000. That's something that the Medical Payments Committee, Mary Lane's group, would opine on as those complaints were fielded. The second is really just an overall failure to comply with the eBilling regs, also potentially levied against the payer, and ranging from civil penalties of $500 up to $5,000 max for the calendar year. Now, while there are no specific penalties to providers within these proposed regulations, there are overarching penalties that could be levied against a provider just for general non-compliance with the Tennessee Code. So I don't want people to think, oh, well, there's no penalties specifically earmarked for providers on here. I don't have to worry about this. This is going to be the rule for how work comp is processed, and it is going to be important for everyone to understand and address how are they going to be compliant with this rule promulgated by the Bureau of Work Comp. Again, if you have any questions at all throughout this presentation, please go ahead and put those in now, and we're going to address those at the end of the presentation. We want to make sure we can answer everyone's question with regard to eBilling. You know, we've talked a little bit about the specifics of the rule, the time frames, penalties. Now let's kind of get into really where the rubber meets the road regarding eBilling. That is, what are the challenges associated with eBilling for work comp? It is a different animal than electronic billing for other pay classes. It has its own unique characteristics that need to be addressed in order to be done properly. And I would say, as with any work comp submission, billing submission, e-billing is not unique in that it really starts at intake. It starts at that registration component. And the most important thing for providers to really understand as they look at their e-billing program is, how do I address my work comp intake submission at registration so I can get the ball rolling the correct way? Because I have no hope of having a successful e-billing program if the rest of my billing program in general is not successful for work comp. My recommendation and the recommendation of our group here is to really collaborate with the registration intake departments within the hospital to really identify key pieces of information as the injured workers present. Basically, the first thing is, did that injury happen on the job? And number two, who was your employer? Those are the two really most important things you want to collect early on to start e-billing properly. The third is specific to Tennessee, and that is, do I need to pre-authorize this procedure? Pre-authorization, pre-certification, it's required in Tennessee for all non-emergent medical services, both inpatient and outpatient. So it's very important to be doing that, and that's really just to get paid for the services that you are preparing to do for the injured worker. But if you can identify that the injury happened at work, and you can identify the injured worker's employer, that's going to give you what you need to move forward. Now, really getting to the payers can be a difficult and challenging component. The state of Tennessee does maintain a database by which providers can look up insurance carriers, insurance information for employers to get them closer to who the proper payer may be. It's a free tool on the Tennessee Bureau of Work Comp website. I would recommend everyone using that if you are doing work comp on your own, if you're not partnering with an expert. But,
yeah, and just if I can just highlight something that you'd said there, Jesse, that you know, now in the paper documentation world, if somebody presents, for example, at the emergency room, and all you have is the employer information, you have the option to send the bill directly to the employer through paper and let the employer pass it on to their insurance company. To be in compliance with this rule, you really no longer have that option. You've got to go ahead and then find out from the employer who is their insurer, who then has a requirement to accept that bill electronically. So there may be an additional burden, you know, on your registration intake staff in getting that information.
that's a great point, David. Thanks for bringing that up. So beyond the intake and registration kind of best practices that we need to put in place, we come to the burden of documentation, which is ubiquitous in the work comp. And Mike and Kevin are going to speak a little bit about how to deal with that documentation in an e-billing environment, which is something you don't normally see in group and commercial.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. And as you alluded to earlier, there are a lot of pieces of documentation that need to be sent along with the bill. And when you're sending them electronically, they need to be sent in PDF format. Needs to include your itemized bill, your notes, your doctor's orders, everything that you need to justify the charges on the bill itself. And then you need to be able to link that to the 837 file so that when the payer's system is reading that file, they know which attachment to go grab along with it and package and load into their system together. That's kind of a tricky challenge right there to be able to send all that information over together to the payer.
May I ask them to comment on something related to
Sure,
that? Okay.
go ahead.
I don't know if they can hear me or not, so you may want to repeat
Okay.
me. On the prior page about the requirement to submit requested documentation within 7 business days, my question to them is that something you can do, or is that a challenge that we need to comment on? So they could comment on that.
The question was the 7-day requirement to submit documentation. Is that a challenge or is that doable? Right? Doable? Kevin?
I think it's a challenge because if you look at commercial missions, the claims typically don't require documentation to go along with them. So doing that standard workflow, it's a lot easier to do. With this, you have the additional burden of having to collect the documentation and also kind of decide what documentation to bundle with that claim.
So thank you for that. So if they could please include in their either comments here, which we can retrieve, or send directly to me, what would be reasonable?
Sure.
What would be the preferable process that we would propose back to the Bureau?
Right.
Or timeline?
I think it's a good point, and I think that it really puts us toward the understanding that it's important for us to understand that payers are going to require documentation. The earlier you can get in that process is better than being completely reactive to the type of documents that payers are asking for. It's something that we would recommend as a best practice in order to do this successfully. Certainly something that your e-billing partner should be doing already. But if you're trying to take it on yourself, that's something that you need to address certainly, so you can be compliant with the timeframes. And communicating that back through feedback. We'll get into the feedback later on, but to Gwen's point, let's everyone on the call that's reviewing these regs and rules should get with their teams and identify the things that may be a burden to them that they want to communicate back to the BWC before these go live. We talked about intake, registration, documentation. What about payer acceptance and the standardization that we see out there?
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. So with payer acceptance, obviously they have to accept the 837 file and be able to read that and translate that back into their system along with the documentation. Typically at this point, what they'll also do is an eligibility check on the patient. They will use items such as the Social Security number, the patient name, the claim number, the date of injury, the date of birth, to say, is this somebody that's covered underneath our policy? And if it passes that check, then they accept that into the system. If it does not pass that check, it will get rejected back to the provider, and the provider will have to follow up with the payer, see what information is incorrect, and then resubmit that bill to them with the correct information. Typically, what we see is this happens between 2 to 5 business days after the payer receives the electronic file. And we've noticed that there are a lot of payers that will reject very easily. Now, obviously, this is an electronic submission. This is a computer making a match. If the patient name is spelled wrong, you may get a rejection. If the claim number has a prefix or a suffix that the payer failed to give you over the phone, that may cause a rejection, because they are looking for 100% exact matches to this data. And when they don't find it, they are quick to reject it back and force you to correct it and resubmit it.
Mike, do you see, and Kevin, do we see payers using this as an opportunity to deny claims, or is it more of just systems talking to each other, asking for what they need?
My opinion on that is it's really systems, because you don't have a human interpreting the data anymore. You've got a computer, and there's pros and cons to that approach. But in this scenario, you can't determine if a value of 123H is equal to 123. A human can probably determine the H probably isn't important in this case, but the computer's just going to reject that back. So the quality of the data becomes a little bit more of an issue when it's done electronically. You do get fairly quick responses in those situations that you have rejection, but you just have to handle that that process of correcting the data and doing the resubmission internal, and that's not necessarily something that people are doing all the time.
So the pros and cons, there's certainly pros and cons, right? Pros are, done well, you can really accelerate how fast you get paid.
Absolutely. You
can streamline a lot of your work comp billing, but if it's not done well, it actually amplifies the potential for rejection and slow pay beyond even just standard paper submission. So I think that's a really important point for the members to understand is, yeah, I've got to do it, and if I do it well, there's benefits that come from it. And so, it's a good thing that the state is moving in this direction, and we're certainly going to try and be compliant with what the state's mandating, but not done well can actually have a rebound effect for the success of my work comp billing programs. Now, I guess obviously there's always the option to send bills directly to employers. David talked earlier why that's really not an option in most cases, but in some cases, employers can accept electronic bills, and this rule actually allows them to do that. What's the feasibility of that specifically?
So, we notice a lot of employers paying, especially on physicians' claims and small dollar bills. They obviously won't be able to handle an electronic claim, so we typically send those over by paper or fax. And then, they're going to be probably excluded from this rule by not having a certain amount of work comp business. And, so you have to have a split system to be able to handle which payers, which employers will accept electronically and which ones won't. So you have to be a little bit flexible in your submission process.
What percentage of employers out there do we see that have the capability to accept work comp bills electronically?
I would say about 5 to 10%, and typically it's going to be in those states that have mandated it, your California, your Texas. That's where the majority of them do have the ability to accept electronic claims.
Okay. So those are some of the challenges that are evident for everyone that's dealing with work comp e-billing. Let's talk a little bit about some of the solutions that we have identified for some of those challenges. And really, when it comes to submitting electronic work comp bills electronically, you've got 3 basic options. You're submitting these things directly to the employer, which we saw and talked about earlier is a pretty small percentage of the time. You could work with your clearinghouses that you currently have relationships with that do bill submissions for your other pay classes, although we've identified the challenges that come with the work comp that's unique to work comp. And obviously the acceptance and standardization of those bills being submitted. And lastly, really outsourcing to a work comp partner is the third option. With respect to these options, these solutions, direct electronic submittal, we talked about some of the challenges there. With working with the clearinghouses, what are some of the things that the members need to be aware of with respect to their clearinghouses?
I can take that. I think that one thing you're going to have to do is open up a conversation with your existing clearinghouse, which all of you are no doubt going to have, and find out what payers in the work comp class do they support, and also work out with them what exact process they've got to accept documents which you may not be doing for your other payer classes with that clearinghouse. So it's not overly complex, but it's probably something that you're not currently doing that you're going to have to work out with the clearinghouse there, and to get that pathway flowing. And then you'll have to, of course, set those up in your HIS system as payers that support electronic billing. And go back to what Mike alluded to earlier, is those that do not, you're going to have to identify them and kind of break that process and have a separate process for handling the manual bills for them.
That's great, Kevin.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Kevin and I were kind of had a hallway discussion yesterday with one of our negotiators talking about one of the clearinghouses who doesn't specialize in work comp, and the payer was telling them, look, a lot of the claims that we get from this payer, if we don't have a relationship with them, they drop the bill to paper and just mail it to us. So it's important to investigate, find out from your current clearinghouse what, as Kevin said, what payers do they support, and is it really a broad range of work comp payers, or can they just intake this stuff and then 20% actually go to the payers and the rest get dropped to paper? So important to understand that to make sure you're in compliance.
Very true.
What are the next steps for this proposed rule? Obviously, everyone on the call has had a chance to at least receive the rule. We may not have a chance to look at it yet. My recommendation to everyone in the group is take a look at the proposed rule as it stands and read through it and clearly understand how it's going to impact your business office. Obviously, EnableComp processes electronic bills across the country. The first thing we did was we took a look at the proposed rule and compared it to how it matches up to our best practices. We identified a couple of points. We talked about them earlier in the call. One specifically to the 60-day time frame for resubmission of a bill. We actually recommended 45 back to the state. My guidance to this group is to identify what are the things that are going to be a burden for your billing office to process. What are the things that after you talk with either your clearinghouse or your e-billing partner, What are the things that are going to be a challenge for them to be successful in? And make sure to submit that information. And Gwen and Marilyn have asked for that to come directly here. So if you could consolidate information and email it to Gwen specifically with the email on the screen for those that are just dialing in and not viewing, that's gwalters@tha.com. Everyone should have her email address from the invite. I think I may send my questions to Gwen too and get her to consolidate them. So THA has been gracious enough to consolidate information and put together a global response back to the Bureau for things that we are concerned with. From a time frame standpoint, this rule as proposed will undergo a public hearing on August 8th at the Bureau building, which is located at 220 French Landing Drive. Mary Lane, I believe that's open to the public for everyone to attend. Certainly we will be there, but I think comments should be submitted to Gwen before the end of the month. So July 31st should be the deadline for you and your teams to put together concerns, requests, proposals for changes, and they could be anything. It's wide open, and of course then they'll address some of those in a public forum on August 8th, after which any changes will be made public, and we expect that the timelines for the January 1 go live for payers and June 1 for providers will remain unless there's a reason that they need to extend it. But as of right now, that's the time frame that we are specifically looking at. The last thing I would recommend is digest what we've talked about today and really make the decision on how you are going to be able to comply with the proposed rules. It's very important to have that conversation now. If you need to put together a partnership with a clearinghouse or identify an outside vendor to come and do it for you, that may take time to set up. So you want to make sure that you're taking those steps sooner rather than later so you can make sure that you're compliant with the regulations as they stand. That's the primary meat of the presentation. I think now is a great time for us to take a look at some questions, answers that we've received. So let's go ahead and do that now. First question from Amy Crawford is, what is the website for the work comp carriers, just to have as an FYI? It's a good question. So if you go to the, I don't have the website in front of me, but if you go to the Tennessee Department of Workers' Compensation page, and if you go to the very bottom of that page, there will be a section called Providers. When you click on Providers, it's going to have a link to it called Employee or Carrier Insurance Confirmation. And what I can do is I can get that link to Gwen and Mary Lane that they can distribute out to everyone. If you click on that link, it'll allow you to type in the employer information, and then it'll bring up the list of who the carrier on record is for that employer for workers' compensation. Another question from Amy, 10 to 12 business days would be good. Such as myself, I have commercial insurance as well as worker comp to do daily. That's a great recommendation, you know. Not sure if we're talking about documents or time frames to wait for documents. We talked about this earlier about getting more, getting out in front with respect to documents.
Yeah, so that's about how long they would need to be able to submit documents. As
Sure.
opposed to the
7 days.
Okay.
Right. So a recommendation, I guess, that THA would consolidate is to try to expand the time frame for those documents. If that doesn't happen, then that's something that we would recommend. You need to take a look at a policy change internally about getting documents earlier in the process specific to work comp. So, I mean, we talked about this earlier. It's an overarching concept within work comp. Eligibility really kind of dominates, you know, the group side. It is not important for work comp. Work comp is all about compensability and documents. They want to be able to see that the services rendered are tied to the compensable injury. So the sooner you can move documents into the billing process, the better you're going to be as far as getting payment quickly and accurately. Waiting for document requests is not really the best way of doing it. It's certainly allowable under the rules. Our recommendation would to get much more advanced in how you deal with documents. And if you look at your work comp billing over time, the payers are asking for the same documents over and over and over again. Very rarely are they going to ask you for a document that's not unique. It's the basic, it's the itemized statement, it's some component of the medical record for the particular service. They want a confirmation of that pre-authorization and some other things as well. So identify what those are and incorporate those into your billing practices, and you'll see much more success. Certainly, if you're using an expert partner to do that, they should be doing that as part of their best practices. Another question we have, will you reorganize and respond to the 276 file sent?
So this is in reference to a claim status request. I don't believe the proposed ruling has anything in it about that. I can speak also just in general for work comp across the country that we deal with at EnableComp. We see very, very few, if any, payers support a claim status request for work comp class. Currently, it's pretty standard in many other pay classes, but in work comp, it's definitely something that's in its infancy at best right now.
Is there a good reason for that, or is that just a feature they're not requiring that they require of
legislation hasn't required it, number one, and it's probably you know, just along the timeline, I think of what Jesse had mentioned, maybe 8 to 10 years. Some of us have joked it's more like 20 years behind.
8 to 10 is being very, very,
being very kind.
Very kind to work on. That's right.
But I think it's probably just a lot to do with that. You know, you start with the submission, and then as those processes at the payers and in providers for that matter mature, I do expect 276s and 277s to become, you know, more common as time goes on.
We had a couple of questions that were submitted prior to the webinar. I want to at least touch on them briefly. You know, one of the questions, and we talked about it as far as penalties, was, you know, what happens if I just do nothing? What if I don't address this rule at all? Well, there's a couple of outcomes. It's still in a proposed form. The whole thing could be abolished on August 8th or after that. None of us expect that to happen. Probably what will happen is there may be some minor tweaks to some of the timing, but we fully anticipate that this is going to happen on January 1st for payers and June 1st for providers. And my recommendation is that you do address this rule and you identify that. No, there are not penalties that are listed in this rule for providers, but as I spoke to on the call, there are overarching penalties that could be levied against a provider for non-compliance with the Tennessee Code. Since this is going to be a rule that's going to be incorporated into the Tennessee Code, it would fall under those general parameters for non-compliance. So I want to make sure that we don't even you know, think about the option of not addressing the rule. And at the end of the day, it's really in the hospital's best interest to be billing electronically for work comp anyway. So moving forward with this is something that would be recommended for everyone. Another question we had, and this is one I'll put to Kevin and Mike, is how many payers support electronic claims today in the work comp world?
So most of your larger insurance companies will accept electronic claims, of course. Your Gallagher Bassett, your Travelers, they do a decent job of it, providing information back and intaking those claims and then paying on them electronically. As we alluded to earlier, there are a lot of self-paying employers that may not participate in that. And there is certainly variations in the feedback you get from payer to payer. Some of them will provide an acceptance back in the 277 file. Most will just provide the rejection if they do not accept it. So there can be some challenges there with identifying whether the payer actually has the claim or not.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, it may be obvious, but certainly the predominance, the percentage of payers that support electronic on the work comp side is obviously lower than it is on other pay classes, and that's probably going to be the case for several years. And then the kind of standardization that has occurred in, say, commercial claims will take several years to occur in work comp, would be my estimation, just based on what happened with work comp over the last, or commercial payers over the last many years. To Mike's point regarding what kind of data you get back, when you get that data back, much of that is outlined in the proposed legislation, but again, I don't realistically think all of the payers will implement every bit of that day one. Some might, some won't. just based on what we've seen across the country. And that's just something you just kind of have to deal with. All of them, when they implement this, do accept them on the intake side. It varies greatly amongst how well their process tends to work and how much information you get back and how frequently you get it before the bill is either paid or rejected.
Good. Another question we had was, what's been our most difficult issue to overcome in implementing e-billing for work comp? And we've been doing it for a while. What have been some of the big hurdles that we've had to overcome, and something that we would imagine that a hospital would have to expect as well?
I'll bring up a couple, and Mike, you add if you've got some others. One issue is standardization. Sometimes, X12 is a great standard. It's a nice template, and this is true of eligibility and the other X12 formats that we deal with in healthcare. But the bad thing is that occasionally that you'll run across such scenarios where even though the template is standard, the data that gets put in it or the way that it is used is not 100% standard across payers. That's still the case with commercial payers even today. A great example of that, and that we've run across with work comp claims, has been a particular field that isn't necessarily required, may be required for a particular payer. Social Security number, for instance. There are some payers that require that, some that don't. There's a standard place to put it, but you don't always have that, and you certainly don't have to submit that on a typical commercial plan. So that'd be one example of that. Mike, do you have any others that you'd like to bring up?
Yeah, certainly as far as what's difficult to overcome, managing the responses as they come back in. As you get a 277 rejection from a payer saying that they're not accepting that bill, 9 times out of 10, that's patient eligibility not found with the payer is the reason you get back. You have to intake that information and then provide that back out to your billing team so that they can act on it and they can follow up with the payer, get that additional information, get it corrected in the system, and then send it back out electronically. Also, how do you handle the electronic remittance when that comes back in? If you get a denial, what triggers do you build in your system or in your process to intake that file and then push that information back out to your billing team so that they know that a denial was received and they can reach out to the payer, get an EOB, and work on submitting an appeal to get a payment on that claim.
I think, another item obviously is documents. It's a continual challenge, and that's the case even if you're doing this on paper, as we all know. And that, of course, is a continued issue electronically, submitting those. We know there's timelines, and some of that's a gray area in terms of what those timelines might be when the proposed rule becomes real. However, regardless, getting that data to the payer in some form of timely manner and doing that in an electronic basis is a little bit of a challenge, and I don't expect that to be trivial.
Yep, and one thing we're running across now is payers are putting size limits on the amount of pages that you can submit electronically within the documentation. We like to err on the side of sending everything we can possibly find so that they can't deny it for lack of documentation and send it back. And that can be challenging when then a payer is putting a page limit on it, saying that you can't send over a certain amount. So how do you determine what's most important to include in that documentation and send just what is needed to the payer so that you don't get a denial for lack of documentation?
Okay, we had another question from Kim Howell, and it is, in the markets where there's already an e-billing mandate, how do vendors that handle services for insurance carriers perform? For example, One Call Medical facilitates services for work comp carriers. They have to accept e-billing and e-documentation, or will they leave the market due to expense? It's a good question, and the answer is no. They're going to have to comply. One Call specifically operates effectively as a payer, so they're a hybrid PPO network, if you will, that would fall under the payer requirements in those states. And we do see One Call and other vendors that work with the insurers operating in Minnesota, Texas, and North Carolina, and they are required to be compliant with these laws as well. So no, I don't see them exiting the market at all. If you think about it, electronic billing is a huge efficiency gain for them. They don't have to spend as much time and effort in managing paper billing and all the scanning and the keying and mistakes that go into that. So certainly they're I wouldn't say eager, but much more prepared to deal with this because they have to deal with their other lines of business anyway. So I do not expect them to exit the market. If anything, I'll see more adoption on the payer side. And typically what we see from a legislation standpoint is it's very payer focused. A lot of states have payer electronic billing requirements and not so much on the providers. So the providers are kind of the last ones to come along the electronic billing for work comp story at this point. Any other questions that we've got from this group? Mary Lane, Gwen?
Just want to reiterate that we really would appreciate their feedback as to any concerns or questions they have, because this is at present a proposed rule, and so this is our opportunity to provide input back to the state and perhaps have them make some changes if we have areas that are of concern. So we really do want to hear from you.
Absolutely. And if we can get that information before the end of July, then we can consolidate that and get that to the group. Those are all the questions that we've got so far and everything that we have. Speaking for EnableComp, I'm thankful for the invitation for us to come and speak to everyone today. I guess we talked about this earlier. If anybody has questions about who we are, what we do, feel free to get with us after the call. Mary Lane and Gwen have our contact information, and this presentation will be posted as well with the ability for people to reach out to us if they have additional questions, correct?
You'll be sending the PowerPoint out to everyone who is registered.
Also, but we will also post it with the audio. So again, if you need to, if you just look at it and you want to hear what was said, you will be able to go to the website. And I'd like to thank you all for your time and thank you in advance for reviewing the rules and getting comments to us. And especially would like to thank EnableComp for their time today. Again, they have been very good partners with THA in helping us work through changes to workers' comp over the years, and we appreciate that support. And I believe, as Jesse said in the slides, if you're interested in talking to them further, there are contact information for all of our speakers on our call today. So with that, if we don't have any more questions, we'll give you back about 5 or 10 minutes to your day today, and thank you again for participating.